profesori i studenti. Moje ime je Ibrahim Diallo, kao znate od juče, iz Republike Gvineje. Naš službeni jezik je tamo francuski, ali ovo tema rad će biti međunarodno i obrazovanje u primjeru Južne Afrike. Nije Gvineja, ali kako znamo, Južna Afrika je daleko od Gvineja napređena, još mi trebamo puno da stignemo njima. Ja ću pročitati ovo rad na engleskom jeziku, pošto, kako vidite, moj srpski nije tako. Educational management on the example of South Africa. Leadership and management in educational institutions. Educational institutions belong to the service sector and at the same time intellectual organization. It is important to note, because the management of the service intellectual organization is radically different from the manufacturing sector. On the other hand, schools are complex and dynamic systems and as such are subject to the laws that govern such systems. They are all characteristics and non-linear and dynamic systems. That's unique because in each of them there are different people, whether it is for those who provide educational services like teachers and non-teaching staff, and those who consume the services. Experience and research show that school principals are often not aware whether they manage or lead. They just do the job for the benefit of students, trying to implement educational program in the most efficient manners. For example, schools in South Africa whose work on certain criteria is not satisfactory require a special commitment to the fundamental values and principles of management. Organization to be efficient, unlike other schools where the emphasis is on vision and leadership. Depending on this, a certain order in terms of regular schools attained by the students and teachers establishes. The conduct of a good order. A conduct of good order and discipline in the classroom, literature providing, after establishment and functionality, leaders can develop a vision and through visualize design future. Give the above, it shows the need to develop specific models and concepts that will be applied in the management, but amplification will depend on a number of factors and relevant factors. Bowman and Deal are saying about the conceptual pluralism as inconsistency of many voices. Each model has something to offer, but there are also a number of specific deficiencies. Concept models that are favored by some theorists and practitioners explicitly or implicitly inevitably affect or determine the decision-making process. In this context, Morgan uses the metaphors to explain the complex nature of organizational life and notes that any theory or perspective we bring is incomplete, biased and potentially of misleading character. In other words, concepts and strategies that is in particular situation give satisfactory results, in other can be dysfunctional and inefficient, which requires the need to introduce individual models of management to identify specific characteristics at the macro or micro level of certain. Leadership models in educational systems. The literature on managing education institutions has generated a large number of alternative and competing models that are used in education systems. According to Bush, there are 6 concept and schools managing models, such as formal, collegial, political, subjective, ambiguous, and cultural. Bush and Glover, extending the previous numbers, speak more specifically about the following models of education management as follows. 1. Managerially through transformation. 3. Participatory transaction. Postmodern, moral, instructional, and in the end, the contingency. Each of these models has something common, but also a number of specific features that should be applied in practice. We should keep in mind that there are no ideal models, nor are they possible, as there is nothing perfect in the science of management. This is because management involves working with people and for the people. Given the fact that the educational systems are extensive in terms of work, and at the same time, they are intellectual. So it is necessary to find the so-called soft management styles. Those styles that will respect the people who are in position to provide services, but also those who use the services, which require something beyond explanation. A wise man once said, "Be humble to whomever you learn from and whoever you teach." Now we'll take an example of the management they use in South Africa, that is Ubuntu and Nekgotal, as models of educational system leadership in South Africa. The above models that I didn't explain because we don't have time, that are used in the management of education system, and their applications in South Africa are presented. The fact is that South Africa has different systems of education, ranging from modern to very primitive working conditions of individual school systems. In such circumstances, it is difficult to extract some common feature and principle that would be equally valid for the educational system of this country. A more detailed analysis shows that the models are taken from theory and practice of developed market economies. Here, as in other areas, are shown that developing countries and traditional economies were mainly followers of what is happening in the developed countries, where often the cosmetic changes was mechanically transmitted from those practiced in those countries. Mechanical conveying of the experience has not provided satisfactory result because not every seed grows in every soil. Disproportional in social, economic and cultural development have prevented realization of minimal effort, which requires the construction of one school system leadership that fits developing countries or those in transition. This statement is true for South Africa too. However, South Africa's best known leadership model is the so-called Ubuntu, which has its roots in traditional African society and represents the relationship between people, collectivity. It is, in fact, a model that in itself includes collective moral and collective character. It emphasizes that it is necessary that the head of the educational institution is a good person. It is believed that good man will become a good expert, while the poor man, meaning here a bad man, can never become a good expert. This reasoning makes sense, especially when it comes to educational institutions where there is a high presence of people. According to Mbiku, the most important thing is the fact that principle emphasizes the African cultural heritage whose content is caring for people. Ubuntu, in the opinion of management theorists and particularly gain in importance in the future. because the collective moral and leader who is collective player can better articulate the interests of all stakeholders in relation to the individual person. Nsila goes one step further and claims that Ubuntu is one of the core values of the South African Constitution, which has its roots in traditional African society. It connects Ubuntu with democracy, arguing it is an ideal democratic principle that contributes to the moral stability, both in South Africa and at the global level. According to previous well-known ACE, South African School of Management, introduces the Lek Gotla concept. Under this concept, leader, Kosi, should adopt the principle of trusting by followers in making management decisions. It turns out that the trust is the most important condition for leadership, and that no one can exert influence on the employees and other parties, even in the students, while we're talking about students, there is no trust. The problem of trust is that it is very difficult to achieve trust and very easy to lose it. Ngozi is the leader must believe employee and people and to listen to its voice without prejudice, creating a permanent climate of trust. The problem of each concept is in the school system leadership is its use in developing countries and traditional economies. Implementation of SASA, South Africa School Act, emphasizes the importance of leadership and management practices in educational systems. Principals are overwhelmed by politicians, advisors, officials, consultants, and academics on how to manage schools. Many of these recommendations are not imbued with explicit values or concepts. In practice, the conceptual language is often used to achieve the same objectives and intention of policy. In the resume, paper emphasizes management models. Managing educational system with particular emphasis on management of school system in South Africa. It should be noted that for the educational system is appropriate to use the term leadership because the leadership as the classic phenomenon of leadership is more used in the management of educational institutions, while leadership is based more on recruiting staff and other stakeholders to create, to accept, and implement ideas. The leadership instead of management is typical of intellectual organization in which should be applied the soft management style by the rule in order to achieve satisfactory effect. African school system management model is more based on leadership as classical industrial system of using hierarchy, superiority, and inferiority, and strong formal positional authority. Model in South Africa suggests that the concept in managing various educational institutions, they provided the relatively clear legal framework of management, but relatively little empirical background and support to these management. But relatively little principal background and support to these concepts. It seems that the concept of managing educational institutions in South Africa is normatively well established, but in practice, its implement is absent. No matter which model is applied, the focus must be on teaching, learning. South African Ministry of Education criticizes teachers and principals who are content with average. In order to apply the modern trends of education management systems, it is necessary to formulate a new strategy at the state and to understand education from a holistic point of view. Changes are needed in terms of greater autonomy of school leaders, because it is no longer possible to wait for the decision of the government, the ministry. In this context, it is necessary to develop new techniques, skills, and knowledge to manage schools, but to prepare other participants in the educational process too. It seems that the instructional or pedagogical leadership is the most appropriate for education system leadership in South Africa. This includes design or resign the existing school system in such a way that it is understood that the core mission of the school is to acquire knowledge and abilities for the future in order to address the increasingly complex and uncertain problems. Fala na paz de um bibliotec.